All right, folks, I'm back. Let's try this again. All right, so my video kept stopping on me because I was running out of storage. So I had to delete some things. So hopefully now this will be fine until I can at least get somewhat finished with this. So let's try again. All right, so anyway, just for reference, here is the the photo that I'm working from, since a lot of my peppers have kind of gone bad. But notice this is a really nice high-res photo, so I can zoom in really closely and see lots of details and lots of, color variation and things like that. So hopefully you guys have taken photo reference of your still life, because it's good to have even if you're not using fruit like I am, or vegetables, or whatever you want to call them. So I'm going to have this kind of off camera but propped up so that I can refer to it. If you want to look often at your reference. Okay. So let's continue where we left off a little while ago. All right. My paint is mostly dry now. Oh, don't want to bump that. Sorry. Whoa. Okay. There we go. A little wobbly, but not too bad. Okay. All right, so I'm going to try to cover this pepper with some more orange and maybe just do a little more tweaking on the yellow, but for the most part I think I'm fairly happy with how that's turning out right now. And then we'll do a little work on the green. After that, we'll be ready to work on some background stuff. All right. So again, don't forget you want to have some brown paint, whether you're mixing it yourself or not. Again, I've got some straight out of the tube brown paint just to make it easier. I've got some burnt sienna and some burnt umber. Just put a little bit there on the side. Again, it doesn't take much, just a little bit. And get a little more red on my palette. Again, doesn't take much. Alright, so I'll get my brushes. I'm going to mix up a little more of my orange. Take most of that yellow. Grab a little tiny bit of white there. Let's cover over this. Remember, I painted solid white over this earlier, or mostly solid white, because I had a dark speck that would not go away. The colors were too translucent, so that seems to be doing the trick. And now I just want a very thin layer of orange to kind of go over, kind of doing a little glaze of orange. Kind of push all that back. When you're using a glaze, you want, a fairly wet brush. You don't want it soaking wet, but you want enough to where you've got a nice thin layer of paint to help with the transparency. Just enough to push things back a little bit, but you still want to see the remnants of what's underneath it. Okay, so that's working pretty well. Put a little bit more yellow in that. There are some definite spots of lighter orange in there. Like so. And while I have my orange kind of mixed up the way I like it, go back and revisit this a little bit more too. Right, again, what we're working towards here, hopefully I'm not repeating myself too much from the earlier videos, but I don't know exactly if this got cut off or not, but because I had earlier I was having problems with the video stopping before I realized it stopped. So I may have said it and not had it recorded. But basically, you want your paintings to have a sense of rich layered quality. You don't want a painting that looks flat, right? You don't want a painting that like literally just has like 1 or 2 layers of color on it. You can tell those paintings that look kind of flat and kind of lifeless. That's the telltale sign of an amateur painter, right? You want to build up lots of different layers of color variance and color, just different, similar colors. Like, you can't really tell from right here, but if you look really closely at this painting, there's all kinds of very subtle hues, different hues of oranges and reds and yellows in here. You can see all the previous layers that I've put down on here, and they're kind of, coexisting. They're very subtle, but they're there, and they're really helping to give this painting a richness and a sense of like a vibrancy that you're not going to get from a painting that's, only got a couple of layers of color on it. So the more you do with your color layering, the more interesting your painting is going to be. So, I mean, we're not talking 1 or 2 or 3 layers. We're talking like 8, 10 layers or more of just building up shadows and highlights and warm and cool areas of color. That's what you want. Okay. Bit of dark color showing through there, so I'm going to put just a little dab of pure white paint in that area, and then when it dries I'll go back over it with some orange. Do some really, really light orange here. This area is closest to the light source. As well as in here. I'm kind of combining the wet into wet blending and very carefully trying to blend some wet into dry areas. Also kind of got the ceiling fan going, which I should probably turn off because it's blowing air down on the painting and making it dry a little faster. Then I would like. But that's okay. Now, these peppers are very shiny and they're very reflective. So I have these very subtle kind of reflections of lighter color in here. It's kind of tricky to pull off, but try to go in here and okay. And again, I've got some really extreme bright white highlights because of the shininess of the pepper, but I'm not going to add those right now. Definitely want to hold off till the end on those. I'll add a little brown to my orange. Actually, I'm going to take a little bit of orange out of this. Add it to a little bit of burnt umber. Very gradually. I don't know if you guys can see that or not. I'm going to go back and add some more darker areas here. Just slightly lighten up that shadow a bit in there. Paint's a little dry, gonna add a little bit of water. Blend that shadow there, the edge. Another important thing about painting is just getting your edges accurate, you know. Painting a soft edge transition where you see a soft one, and painting a crisp one where you see that. You gotta really be looking at your still life fairly often. So I think I've gotten that a little further along. Trying to capture the subtleties there. What I do first is I tend to kind of paint some harsher shadows and edges. Then I try to push it back a little bit so that there's still some variation there, but I want some very subtle changes. All right. And again, you're just sort of trying to get it to where it feels right. You're trying to match it to your still life. But if you know, there's also a little bit of room, and I've spoken about this before. There's a little room for leeway, for some exaggeration, for some enhancement. So maybe you're slightly exaggerating a few areas here and there. But as long as it looks good and it works, then it's not too jarring or doesn't look too bizarre. It's fine. Okay. I used up all my yellow, so I'm going to put a little more yellow. Remember, yellow goes by quickly. Can use a lot of that. Luckily, I've got some extra yellow here, so if I run out of this, I've got more. Hopefully you guys have done the same and ordered some extra if you're running low. So yeah, edges are important in paintings. Layering is important in paintings. And having a sense of rich color variation. Subtle, warm, and cool spots. You know, areas of shadows and highlights that feel convincing, feel consistent. Having some subtlety is important. See, I'm basically going over with pure yellow, and it's still showing through what's underneath it. But I like that right now because I want to, again, push these shadows back a little bit. They're a little, the contrast is a little too strong. So you can try to mix the color, pre-mix the color on your palette and push it back that way, or push it back with some glazes like this. And remember, I showed you this last time too, but I'm not sure if it actually made it to camera or not. You can get a different brush with no paint on it, even this flat brush here. You know, you might want to wet it a little bit, but you can use that to, you got paint in an area and you got dry paint underneath it. Just use that to kind of wipe away any excess paint. if you have covered something that you didn't mean to cover, or if the glaze turns out to be thicker than you anticipated. Okay. Basically, I mean, there are some, rules that work, things that you maybe should do when you're painting, but ultimately, a lot of painting is trial and error, experimentation, and sometimes it's just happy accidents. Sometimes when I'm painting, I will get an effect or, paint an object that, I'm like surprised at how well it turned out. And I'm like trying to think, trying to explain to someone how I did that, and I can't because I honestly don't know how I did it. It's called a happy accident, and they happen a lot in paintings, where sometimes, without even trying, you manage to do something that works really well, and then recreating it is kind of a challenge. But the accidents keep happening, the happy accidents. Okay. All right. And maybe we'll take a little bit more of that brown. Mix it with some yellow. Darken that edge a little bit more. Go for the burnt umber here. It's a little bit of a darker brown than the burnt sienna. It's going to work a little better as a shadow. Mixed in with that yellow. And brown is a nice warm color too, so that works really well when you're painting a warm object like a yellow or a orange object. Brown works really well to darken warm colors especially. Works okay on cool colors too, but cools are usually better darkened by, blues, dark blues, or again, complementary colors work really well. All right. That's a little darker than I wanted. That's okay. So see right here, I see that that's dark, so instead of continuing to paint, I'm going to stop. Get some of that excess brown off of there. And then just work what little bit I have in there into the painting. And they make, you know, round and flat bristle brushes. I'm working with a flat right here, obviously, and most of the brushes that came in your set are flats, but if you find that you really enjoy painting and you want to kind of get into it more, I recommend you go out and get yourself some different types of brushes, some rounds and flats, and see which ones that you like working with. Flats are better for larger areas of coverage. Rounds are better for smaller areas and for detailing. So later on, when I do the really fine details on some of these highlights, I'm gonna use a round brush. Okay. That's pretty close to what I want. Okay, so again, just kind of going in and adding some more polish, some more subtlety, another layer of refinement. Okay. So now, get some more blue. The other blue I had on there was dried out. A little more blue on there. I'm going to mix up some green. I'm going to work on this green pepper a little bit. And then I think I'm going to be ready to work on the background. And then I'll go back and add some more refinement finishing touches on some of the fruit. The peppers and whatnot. I guess peppers are a fruit. I don't know. People are always trying to change the definitions of these things, saying a tomato is a fruit, stuff like that. So I don't know if peppers are considered a fruit or a vegetable, but whatever it is, I'm gonna paint it. All right. So once again, I'm just gonna kind of try to mix up a color that is close. There it is right there. You can see it. And I'm just gonna go in and test it out first. It's a little lighter. So just add a little bit more blue just to darken it slightly. See, I'm just gradually adding a little bit of blue in there. Taking a little bit from there. I'm not trying to add a whole glob of blue into that. And remember, it's going to always dry darker. But I think that's a little too light. So That's better. Okay. And this up here I'm seeing is a little darker, so I'm going to just add a little bit of brown to what's on my brush. Take a little bit of this from the side and add it in. But I'm not going to go crazy because I don't need that much of that color. I just need a little bit, so I'm not going to mix a ton of it on my palette because it'll just waste paint. And up here I've got just a darker kind of a area. Just going to blend that in. I'm not quite happy with that, so I'm going to add a little bit of blue to it as well. That's looking a little better. And while I've got this dark color, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the stems of all these peppers because it's a much darker green. Than what I've got down there. So I'll go ahead and get some of that going too.